Hello, good morning, dear students, colleagues, and friends. Thank you for being here today. I am Christos Goutsios. I'm Associate Professor on Film School here in Thessaloniki. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Frédérique Pressmann's Masterclass, which is entitled Writing with Sounds. Frédérique Pressmann is a documentary filmmaker and sound artist who was born in Paris. She started her career in New York in the late 80s as a written press journalist, and in the 90s she worked as a radio producer. She soon moved on to documentary filmmaking as a more personal approach, and she directed 3 films until now. She also produced numerous soundscapes and radio documentaries, working mainly for French public radio. Since 2009, she has also been teaching documentary practice in high schools and colleges in France. On behalf of our school, I would like to express my gratitude to the Thessaloniki Documentary Festival, thank you, for organizing today's masterclass. Such initiatives are of great importance for audiovisual education for both students and us, professors and teachers, and are praised by our school. It is a valuable opportunity to listen, think, and learn. In this particular masterclass, we are invited to rediscover the art of radio documentary and the story possibilities of the sonic means. So many thanks to everyone who helped on making this event happen. Frédérique, the floor is yours.
So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here this morning. So we'll be talking today about radio documentary, or also known as sound documentary, audio documentary. It's all a little, there's a variety of terms. But I guess most of you are familiar now with the podcast concept, which is ubiquitous. In reality, podcast doesn't really speak about a genre, although it has become sort of a genre, but really it is like a broadcasting system. And if it's a genre, it's usually now a pretty poor one, in the sense of, in general, just like of one voice up close telling a story, and at best some sounds and music trying to illustrate what's going on. What I'm going to try to share with you today is more like how sound can be used as narrative material, the same way that images are in audiovisual documentary, which I'm sure you're much more familiar with. There is a French tradition of radio documentary which dates back and is very interesting, and so I'm going to be focusing on that mainly. But I recommend. There's a pretty nice article by Aris Dimokidis in the non-catalog of this festival's edition, which also talks about how radio documentary existed prior to podcasts, and trying to put things back in perspective. Things weren't invented by when the internet was invented and the podcast came about. Oops, I shouldn't do. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background. As Christos said, I'm a filmmaker and sound radio maker, and I switch from one to the other, which is why it's interesting for me to try to share my thoughts about radio documentary, because I also have this practice as writing with images and sounds. I do both, and I switch, and I I never actually have doubts. When ideas come, and that's the way I work, it's like I don't look for ideas, but they come once in a while, not very often, but they always come with their form, which is to say I always know whether it has to be a radio documentary or a film. And most of the time, I think sound for me is quite enough, in the sense that for me, a lot of what we see now in terms of radio documentary, film documentaries, audiovisual, in many cases, the images are superfluous. You know, really, basically, the story, the narrative is carried on by the sound, the interviews, whatever, the voiceover, and then images come as some kind of illustrations, very often. And because of that, and because we live in such a visual world, and we're so saturated with images, I think that working only with sounds is very refreshing. You know, it's like opening up a different space, which is largely giving more space to the imagination. There's a really nice saying, which is attributed to Orson Welles. I don't know if you've heard it, and it's probably apocryph. So, but I love it. And he apparently said, "I prefer radio to cinema because on radio the screen is larger." And I love this image. I think it's really true. Even if you didn't say it, you should have. So that's for me. That's the beauty of sound documentary. It's also radio. Working with only sound is a lot lighter in many ways, and it's lighter. It's definitely less intrusive. So when you come up to people trying to, interact and record them, it's always easier when you come with just like a sound equipment rather than coming with a camera. It's also cheaper, so it's a lighter economy everywhere. It's true in France, but I'm sure it's true here as well. So for me, it's always a relief to go back once I've made the film, like for 5 years, which is usually what happens. Working on smaller pieces, and even if they're not shorter, but like just like sound pieces is a great relief and very nice to switch from one another. And then of course working on sound pieces also like feeds my relationship to sound in my films. And how film can have like a really strong, sound have a really strong impact in a film, in a documentary. But I'm not going to talk about that aspect today, but really focus on what happens when we're telling a story just with sounds. But in any case, I guess the goal is the same in both, which is sharing a point of view on the world, and telling a story from a specific point of view. And I really want to insist on that, because documentary really is about having a point of view, and even if it's not stated very blatantly, it's a matter of style, but it always is. And telling the story with elements that are captured from reality versus rewriting them, So I'm going to try to define a little bit. Okay, I forgot to say we're going to have a Q&A at the end. But if you have questions throughout, I'm going to try to leave space for that, and please feel free to raise your hand, and if it's not the right moment, I will let you know. But you will have space to ask questions. So radio documentary really is as diverse as visual documentary. And as I said, I will be more, we'll try to share more of the French tradition because it's the one I know best, but also because I think it's a very interesting one, which really is very much focused on sound and less on narration when you compare it with, for instance, the Anglophone tradition and what, for instance, what the work that has been done in the U.S. You know, it's a pretty specific one. But in any case, to try to define what a radio documentary is, when you compare it to film, of course, the big difference is you don't have any images, more space for imagination, also more freedom of constructing things. Sound is very flexible, and that's the beauty of it. When you, for instance, most of you come from the film school, so you know what I mean by that. With sound, you can recreate fake sequence shots. When with images, you can't. You shoot from beginning to end a scene, and you decide to use it as a whole. And if there are moments that are a little weaker, well, you have to decide whether, if you want to have a sequence shot, you need to leave them in. With radio, you can actually take them out, and if you cut the paste in a way that's not obvious, no one will hear it. I did this work for RT Radio many years ago in the office of a social worker. I was her, the social worker, and the person, the various, I mean, it was like a series, and each little documentary was a discussion between her and a different person who was coming. And in general, the discussion would last about an hour, and in the end, my pieces were 5 to 8 minutes long, and it felt like you were in the whole, throughout the whole process, just because you can actually make it happen if you edit it right. Sorry. You can also switch, put things before, move them around. It's very, very flexible. Also because you're dealing only with one medium, which is sound. When the audiovisual, you have images and sound. It sounds obvious, but it's definitely an important thing. I'm sorry, I think I need to drink a little water. Okay, I hope it's better. On the other hand, it's different from reporting because there's often a confusion between radio documentary and reportage, and I would say the main difference is that, as I said before, there's an author's point of view that's there. Another big difference is that you need time. You should have time in journalism as well, and ideally. It's not always the case, but definitely for documentary making, you need time to establish a connection with the people that you're following, and it's and knowing the situation. And for me, time really is one of the biggest things that you cannot do without. And then there's another aspect which is not present at all in reporting, which is space for research, artistic research or freedom of expression, which I will try to show you with the various things that I'm going to play for you. And then another thing which documentary is not radio documentary, it's not pure storytelling. And I was telling you, very often podcasts nowadays are like really just a basic storytelling. It's not about reading a written text, or it shouldn't be. And definitely documentary is not. The same way that cinema is not filming theater. You know, fiction cinema is not about filming theater. It has its proper grammar and its proper creative elements. Well, the same way radio documentary is not about reading a written text. So it has to find its own form, and each author, but also each subject sort of requires its own form. And that's the beauty of it. That's what's really exciting for me and interesting. So I'm going to now go briefly over a few elements of what I call vocabulary. And then we'll listen to some stuff. But just to make you familiar with what the elements of sound documentary are. Well, I guess the most common is, the one that you all know, is the interviews. Same thing as with the, visual documentaries. People expressing something, telling a story or whatever, or their feelings or whatever it is. It's super important. It's really a great way to get information and to get to close to the people's feeling and for intimacy. And I really think interviews are really, can be very precious if they're dealt with properly. Then you have what I call situations, and what in cinema we usually call cinéma vérité. I guess it rings a bell for you, which is to say, being in a situation and either filming or recording as it goes, like people having a discussion or any kind of action happening, and you actually follow it without intervening, or the least possible. In cinema, I guess one of the very well-known authors who worked with like this is Frédéric Pressmann. Do you know him? No? Yes? Okay. He's a American filmmaker, very old. He's in his probably late 90s now, and or mid 90s. I don't know. Making documentary films for 60 years, I guess. Very interesting ones. He focuses on institutions. Some of his earlier work, for instance, one of his film is called Welfare, and he sort of stays puts in his equipment and crew and in social security building in New York, and just films what's going on there. When I say just films, it's a lot more goes into that, but he really is like a fly on the wall. I don't know if you've heard that expression. So the same idea. It's like you're there and you are following what's going on, but of course your presence will alter things, but it doesn't show in the way, in what is you don't intervene, you don't ask questions, you just like sort of follow what's going on. Well, you can do the same thing with sound documentary as well. Then you have, so I said interview situations, then you have ambiances, which is just like, sometimes it's hard to make the difference between ambiance and situation, but ambiance is really more like you're further away. For instance, if there are people speaking, you're not really drawn to what they're saying. You're not trying to follow the conversation. In a situation, you really want to understand what's being said. In an ambiance, it's more just like to give a feeling of what's of the situation, of where you are, and the words are not necessary. Ambiances are super important to create, an ambiance for for your piece. Then you have close-ups or accent noises, which is like close-up of sounds, which you can use like a close-up in cinema, but also like as a rhythmic element in the global composition. Any kind of, door slamming or any kind of close-up sounds works for that. Then you may have music, and that's an interesting question. I'm not very fond of using music myself, because I think it's very much overused or used in a way, and I find it about audiovisual documentaries as well. It's used in a way to sort of underline, but it can be very, it can be heavy. So I think one has to be really, it works very well to sort of indicate what you should be feeling at a certain point, but it's too easy, I think. And it's more interesting to get to that goal, but through other means, which is the actual sounds. But that's my opinion. In any case, there are two different ways of using music. One would be adding a score to your composition where you feel you need it. And then there's another way, which is called diegetic. Don't know if you're familiar with that concept, but it's the idea that the music is within the scene that's actually going on. And I will play at some point a piece of mine, and you will see that I like that. For me, it's a lot more, it's a more subtle way to use music than the other one. But both work. And then, of course, you have narration. And as you may imagine, that's something I'm trying to get away from for the reasons that I mentioned, because I think it's the same as music in a way. But I'm not saying, of course, there are moments when it's necessary, but I'm always trying to resort to it just like as a last resort thing. It's if there is no other way to say what's going on, to explain what's going on. Try to have people understand it from the situation rather than telling them this is what's happening or this is how I feel or, And so with my students, I usually give them this as a challenge, like how can you tell this story without a narration, without a voiceover? And I think it's at least if anything, a very interesting challenge, intellectual challenge, because it helps you find other ways, even if in the end you decide that you really need to have a voiceover. When I mentioned my students, I realized that I didn't say anything about that, so I'm going to make a little parenthesis. Christos said that I was teaching, and I am. And ever since last year, we started this new course in Paris in the Louis Lumière Film School, which is a famous film school, which also has like a sound department. And we have this summer program for students from all over the world. And last year was the first edition. We're having another one this year. And now the Film Festival of Thessaloniki has become a partner. And so one of the reasons I'm here too is because we're going to select through the podcast competition of the festival the one Greek student who will come to this summer program. So I'm just saying that so that maybe for next year you might be interested in presenting something to the podcast competition, knowing that it could also be a door to enter this summer program, which is really actually pretty interesting. It's 6 weeks long, and it's learning about sound documentary, but also practicing, and in the end, creating a short documentary. At this point, are there any questions? No, okay, that's good. No, yes, all right. So there is one here. I don't see where is the person with the mic. Yes. No, wait, we need to record it, sorry.
Thank you for your very interesting and organized masterclass. I'd like to ask you about the script of a sound documentary and how do you organize the shooting as a process.
When you say the script, you mean, well, can you be more precise? I'm sorry.
No, that in a narrative documentary, usually we start with to find the elements and start to have some idea about the script, okay? And how does it work in this case?
Is it different or is it, yeah?
Yeah, similarities or differences?
I think it's pretty much similar in the sense that you need to find an idea. You need to think about how you're gonna treat it, or which angle you're gonna take, and if you found like if your idea came from a theme or if it came from a character that you met, or and think formally how you're gonna treat it, and try to imagine what it will sound like or look like, and you need to write it. I think it's totally necessary for yourself, to know where you're going, but it's also necessary because you need to find producers in the case of audiovisual documentaries. In the case of radio documentary in France, I'm talking about this experience, France or Belgium, Switzerland, Francophone zone, European zone, you also have to write a synopsis and present it. The thing is, it's shorter in general. It's much shorter than what they ask in television. It's a couple of pages long in general. And then once, and that's presenting it to radios. That's a slight difference. It's not, in films you have other options than television. Now you do have, of course, podcasts, but it's not necessarily an economic option. I mean, it's not something that will necessarily pay. So it's writing it, presenting it to different radio programs that you think might be interested. There aren't too many of them left in France. And then starting to shoot and then editing it. Sometimes, as in the audiovisual world, you start recording as you are writing as well, because, for instance, there is something that cannot be lost. It's happening now. So if you want to have the beginning of that story, you need to start with that. But in any case, it's the same. It's more or less the same process, I would say. Pretty similar.
And what about the crew during the shooting? How many people? What is?
Well, I usually work by myself. If you work, for instance, for Radio France, which is, a French public radio, they usually will have people with you, a couple, like someone who's more, I'm not sure how to say that in English, but someone who will follow the whole process and who's also the editor, and then another person who will be the sound person, recording. But if you insist, like the last piece I did was for Radio France was with my family. It was a very intimate thing, and I insisted that I really wanted to be alone with them, and I could. But it's only some specific programs that accept that. But in general, yeah, it's at best it's a couple of 1 or 2 people with you. For a documentary, fiction is different. You need a lot more people. And you can do it by yourself if you learn how to do it, which is also nice. I kind of like that. Okay, so I suggest we go on with the listening, and in any case, we'll have time later for questions. So I will play a first piece. Of course, one of the problems I had in order to prepare this masterclass was to find things that had subtitles, or that were in English. Most of them are French subtitle, but there will be one piece, which is mine, which is all in English. So we're going to start with a piece that is that was published, produced for Arte Radio, which is an internet radio producer. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Arte, of course, is the French-German television channel. And they started about 20 years ago. This radio, internet radio podcast thing, which has been very innovative. And they say that they're the first, they invented the podcast, which is not totally true. But I mean, they were definitely there. And in the beginning, there was a lot of very interesting stuff that was done there. So this piece is by Mehdi Ahoudig, who's a French author. And it's called Junkies in the Country. It talks about this zone of France, La Meuse, in the northeastern zone, where which is the highest heroin consuming zone in the country, unlike what most people might think. So we're going to listen to it and then discuss it afterwards. One suggestion is for you to so you'll have the subtitles as you hear it, but don't be too try to focus on the sounds as well, and not only on the sound and on the words, and try to identify maybe some of the vocabulary elements that I detailed before in the piece. So I'm going to play now this first thing. Long.
C'est l'horreur, la Meuse, c'est l'horreur, 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 l'horreur. L'horreur. Vous ne croyez pas? C'est d'une noirceur, d'une épaisseur, d'une glauquerie, ça n'a pas d'âme. C'est mort. C'est le pire endroit au monde. J'espère pas y rester très longtemps.
Cette position géographique, donc à la frontière nord-est de la France, qui nous place à peu près 2 heures, 2 heures et demie donc des Pays-Bas, eh bien le principal produit consommé, c'est l'héroïne. La Meuse a donc ce triste privilège d'être le premier département de France sur l'usage d'héroïne, avec des chiffres qui sont 4 à 5 fois supérieurs à la moyenne nationale, quoi. La plupart de nos consommateurs, l'initialisation a été faite à l'occasion de soirées où il y avait des consommations dans une première partie de soirée de produits type ecstasy, toutes sortes d'excitants, et où celui qui initie à ça explique aux consommateurs que pour redescendre, il faut prendre un petit peu d'héroïne. Eh bien, Yves Leclerc, donc magistrat et du parquet, et j'occupe ici donc les fonctions de procureur de la République. La grande difficulté, c'est que la population et globalement les parents.
Oui, rebonjour madame. Je voudrais savoir si je peux voir monsieur Leclerc.
Eh bien, se croient préservés parce qu'on vit à la campagne. Pour eux, c'est l'image d'une problématique de banlieue de grandes villes éloignées, qui vont voir à la télé, etc. Or, le produit, il est à leur porte.
D'accord, ok. Ben, j'attends dans le couloir. Je vous remercie.
L'avantage sur la télé, c'est qu'on peut fumer dans ton métier. Ouais, Régis. Ça va. Je suis avec notre camarade Mehdi de Arte. Vous en êtes où, là? Donc, vous en avez cravaté 2 autres ce matin, c'est ça?
Donc, on en a cravaté 5 autres ce matin.
Ah ouais, d'accord, t'as fait toute la razzia, quoi.
Ah
okay.
Oui, bon, on a fait le réseau, quoi.
Okay.
Donc, on en a fait 2 hier sur le retour. Et on a déclenché l'opération ce matin. Est-ce que les 5 objectifs sont pris? Je pense que oui. Quand je dis que Verdun, c'est un terrain de jeu pour les stupes, c'est réellement un terrain de jeu. Et au niveau de la saisie, donc, je pense que tu as informé qu'on a ressaisi donc 515 grammes d'héroïne.
Ouh, la vache! Ah ouais, bien!
Ah oui, très bien, on est content.
Plus les 190 d'hier, ouais, belle prise, ça.
C'est bien que j'ai la main verte, Yves, quand je me déplace.
Ah ouais, non, je sais bien. Ah ouais, bien. Oui, ça y est, j'ai les messages qui sont sur mon ordi. Donc, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, c'est bon, je les ai tous.
J'ai dit à Doudou, tu n'étais plus à la bière de commerce maintenant. Nous, on travaille pas en dessous de 700 grammes. Hein.
La vache, ouais. Ah ouais, non, bien, bon, super.
Donc, on a 700 grammes en tout, quoi.
D'accord, ouais, donc ça commence à être sérieux, quoi. On va passer à la BR, voir un peu qu'ils nous fassent le point. Mode opératoire extrêmement traditionnel dans nos affaires de stupéfiants ici. Si, tiens, je te donne une lettre, Laurence, à envoyer à la chancellerie, là.
Nous, psychologues, éducateurs, tout ça, on leur donne pas de quelque chose. Le médecin, il donne une ordonnance. Donc, il loupe jamais les rendez-vous parce qu'ils repartent avec une ordonnance. Donc, il y a beaucoup de gens qui prennent des rendez-vous et qui viennent pas. Gaëlle ?
Oui,
voilà.
Ça.
Si tu veux, je vais te donner des feuilles et puis un crayon si tu veux dessiner. Non, tu veux dessiner?
Tu veux dessiner?
Pendant qu'on parle? Hein? Tu veux dessiner? Quand il y a quelqu'un, je préfère que ça soit quelqu'un qui le garde, mais là, je suis tout seul, alors je peux pas le regarder.
Ouais, puis là, pas le choix de l'emmener, personne ne peut me le garder, donc...
Voilà. Alors, vie en couple, célibataire, marié... Compliqué.
Bah, je suis retournée chez mes parents et puis son papa est en prison.
Dieu.
On m'a dit. Regarder son fils et je pense que...
Ah, c'est Christophe. Ah, d'accord. D'accord. Et j'y vais direct, hein, tu veux quoi?
Bah, moi, j'aimerais bien... m'en sortir, trouver un traitement ou quelque chose d'adapté pour m'en sortir, quoi, parce que j'en peux plus, quoi. Puis tout part, quoi. Je veux dire, moi je travaillais, il me reste mon fils, j'ai pas non plus... pour ça, en plus, ça me... On tombe vite de haut, quoi. Puis en Meuse, attention. Il y en a à tous les coins de rue. Non mais c'est vrai,
bah, oui,
Verdun... Vous voulez guérir, ne venez pas à Verdun. Joshua, viens là. Ah ouais, t'as vu la fontaine? Non, c'est pas la fontaine à maman, ça. Nous, dans les campagnes, ouais, c'était super présent, quoi. Héroïne, ecstasy. Quand j'étais plus jeune, j'ai eu plusieurs petits copains qui consommaient et je ne consommais pas. Donc, il y en avait en permanence à côté de moi, je l'ai jamais consommé. Et du jour au lendemain, je sais pas... J'étais anti-drogue, mais on voulait même pas de moi dans les soirées là. Et puis maintenant, voilà quoi. Non, après on ira. Maman est trop grande. Regarde. Bah après ouais, c'est clair qu'en essayant, on se dit ah bah ouais, t'as un sentiment de bien-être, ça c'est clair, mais pour moi, j'ai pas été malade tout de suite, donc puis c'était occasionnel, donc ça allait. Non, on se sent bien, quoi. On a l'impression de flotter, quoi. Et puis quand on n'est pas bien ou dans sa tête ou quoi, on pense plus à rien, quoi. Donc ça permet, voilà, de plus penser à rien, quoi. Doucement, hein. Eh non, tu vas pas dans l'eau, hein. Vas-y. Voilà. Non, c'est tout.
Sorry for the ending that was cut a little short. But so that's the beginning of the piece, which is a lot longer. I think it's 30 minutes long, more or less. You can find it subtitled on YouTube. By the end of the program, I will have some references, and we'll give them to you also on paper. So that's one of the things that you can easily listen to if you want. So have you been able to identify some of the elements that I was discussing earlier, such as interviews, situations, ambiances? And is there anyone who wants to talk about that? Or it's too scary? Oh, yeah, someone wants to speak. Hi. Yes?
Thank you very much for all this. It's a great pleasure. Just a small notice that I really enjoyed the parallel situation between a situation and the narration when someone was entering the door of doctor or the prosecutor, sorry, and at the same time he was saying things. So it was as if we had two screens in our minds.
Alternate editing. Like,
yes.
Yeah. Could you identify who that? So you all know what he's talking about. It's like when the prosecutor is talking about his job and what they're doing. You can hear another guy saying, "Hello, can I enter?" Blah blah. Could you identify that person, the one in the situation who's asking to enter? Who do you think that is? That person who's entering?
It has to do with the person that speaks later, with the woman? Or?
No. The person later is the psychologist. The woman then goes, there's this situation between the psychologist and the woman, but it's someone else who's there. I insist on that point because it's one of the interesting things in this piece. It's actually the director, Mehdi Aoudig. That's himself coming and asking if the prosecutor is available for an interview, and she says, "Come back later," or I can't remember. And so it's sort of like the making of a little bit of the process, which he integrated in the piece. Do you have any idea of why? What purpose that serves? Yeah, there's an answer here. I think you need it because it's going to be broadcasted later, so if we don't want to miss it, that's why.
I think it creates an ambience of a busy office.
That's one thing.
Because we don't really want to recognize the voice of the radio maker, but of Mehdi's voice, we don't want really to recognize this voice. We just want to, as I understand it, to see a busy place.
I disagree with you, because I think, so you're saying that would be like creating busyness, but without, if that was the case, he would not have left his name. It went very fast, which is why I'm insisting on it, and I know it's not very, especially when you're reading the captions, it's not easy. But he's really stating that he's the documentary maker, and I think it's it's a statement. What you're saying could be true if he didn't announce himself. I think it has more to do. Oh, you want to say something? Yeah.
For me, the way he interviewed, he kind of activates me in order to keep attention to what I'm listening more. Because when you listen something, you maybe at times you just lost. You're not losing interest. You're just you're trying to keep. You're trying to concentrate on what you're hearing. And when an outsider, like let's say for example, knocks the door, that means that something else is going to happen. So that's why I'm telling you that. It's a surprising moment for me because I want to know what it's going to be next. It's like, is it a new plot for me? That's what I am.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. There's another, I'm sorry for the question. There are a few questions in the back. I think that has to do with the alternate editing. It's like you have the interview that seems to be going on and you sort of expect it to go on. And the fact that there is another voice coming up, and also which is it's very different. Did you hear how the interview is very nice and up close, and the other one is more from a distance, and it's more a situation than an interview. It's totally a situation. So that's what creates also like the surprise, I think. Yes.
I think it also underlines what you mentioned before, that it is from a specific point of view from a person, not as an objective thing, as science.
Yes, totally. The fact that there's this sort of meta moment, making of moment, shows, it makes the other visible. And it's a way of, in a way, it's being honest. It's saying, it's not something that just happened and it's totally objective and it's we just happened to come by and we recorded it. It situates the author, and although sometimes we don't hear, for instance, his questions when he's talking with the prosecutor, the psychologist, or whatever, we don't hear the questions. We hear them opening up and talking to us as listeners, which is very nice. But he's there. And so he sort of creates himself as a character, which can be interesting. And then later on, the prosecutor actually talks to him, says, it's good in your job, we don't have to, we can smoke, you know. So he's talking to him, and then he's talking about him when he's answering the phone. He's saying, oh, Mehdi is here with me. So all of this sort of creates the author as a character, which situates the point of view. Totally, yeah. Is there someone else who wanted to say something? No. About that, I mean. So yeah, so that's one thing. You saw or heard, I'm sure, that there were some interviews that were very nicely taken and up close, and then situations which usually tend to be a little further away. The one with Mehdi entering is one of them, but there are others, like for instance the outside, when they're outside and the kid is playing, which is almost more like an ambiance because it's far away, but still we can hear what they're saying. Or another situation, very clear, is between the psychologist and the woman who comes for help, and the discussion. In that discussion, there's no intervention by the author. He's really there to record what's happening, but he's not intervening. When we get out and we're in there's again, we revert to alternate editing between this sound, like playground sort of a situation outside, and the woman talking about herself. It's very subtle because it sounds like when she's talking to the psychologist, but if you listen to it again, you'll probably realize that she's talking to us, or that is to say, she's talking through Mehdi, she's talking to us. And this is more an interview. Okay, there is no need to be obsessive about trying to qualify what is what, but the reason, it's nice to know what we're doing, and which is why I'm trying to get your attention to that. To know it's like tools. What tools are we using and for what purpose? Another thing that's pretty obvious, but it's better to say it, there is no narration. All the elements we learn, all the content comes from either interviews or situation, but no voice telling us what's happening. No one says, now we're entering the prosecutor's office. It doesn't say, we hear him asking if he can enter, but it's very different. You know what I'm saying? No one is speaking to us as an audience, telling us what's happening. Another thing is, I was telling you earlier that sound documentary in many ways is easier. There is one way in which it's more complicated, is the fact that we don't see who is speaking. And whereas when you have a film, you see a person once and that person is speaking and you identify them right away, and when you see them again. When you don't have images, it's a lot more complicated, and you're missing elements that come from the way people are dressed, things like that. So one of the tricks we can use is to have people introduce themselves, which is what happens with the prosecutor, right? After we hear him talk, and then he introduces himself. So self-presentation is really important, and especially if you're going to go and make some radio documentaries, you have to remember, always ask people to introduce themselves. You may not need it, but if you do need it, you'll be very happy to have it, and very sorry if you don't. And then maybe one thing I want to say something as well is there's a lot of information that's brought up by the situation. by the various sounds, which are not stated, but like, for instance, in the prosecutor's office, you can hear the old floor squeaking. So it sort of creates a space, a style of office, you know, which is, it's old, it's not, you know. When we're outside on the playground, the space also, the sounds create, obviously, a specific space. And stereo is very, I don't know if you noticed it, but stereo really helps creating space in sound documentaries. You can make a documentary with mono and it's fine. You know what the difference is, right? Mono is like what you're here. Well, I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, it's like just all the sounds in one source, and the only option you have is close and far, you know. Stereo is like having a sense of hearing something different in left and right, and so you can hear actually things going by, and it creates a bigger space. And then, yeah, the last thing I wanted to say was music. In this case, I don't know if you noticed, there is a bit of non-diegetic music in the beginning. There's some kind of composition, pretty subtle, which adds some gravity, some to the very beginning when the guy says, with like the introduction, saying that Meuse is so scary and horrible, and it's a pretty nice way of using non-diegetic music, I think. Although I personally don't, but in this case, I think it's pretty nicely done. Is there anything else that you want to say we haven't said about this piece, or that you felt as you were listening to it, or? Yes, the microphone is coming. Oh, okay. Yes, okay.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. I hope this question is worth it.
A lot of pressure.
I'd just like to ask, what is exactly the difference between a podcast and a radio documentary? I may not be getting this.
Okay. Were you here at the very beginning, or maybe not?
I was, but maybe I didn't get it.
So no, I guess, but you're right. It's an important question, and I think it's worth repeating. Really, podcast is more a means of broadcasting. It's the fact that you can access it over the internet, and usually with a subscription, and you can hear it either on your computer or now most of the time on your cell phone. But it's not a genre in itself. You know, you could, in fact, you can have fiction. You know, you could have documentary. You could have talk shows. You have access to all of that through podcast. But more and more, there's sort of a genre that's emerging as podcasts, and usually it's pretty basic. It's someone talking about their own life or talking about a topic, and it's mostly narration, and then very few other sound elements. But we should remember that it's not a genre. So documentary is a genre, as opposed to fiction, as opposed to talk shows, as opposed to reportage. So in fact, this is a documentary, but it's accessible as a podcast on RT Radio. So you get the difference? Good, but thanks, for asking again. It's important. So maybe we can go on with the next excerpt, which I want you to listen to. It's also an RT Radio piece, which I did back in 2006. This one is just sound. There is no need for subtitles because it takes place in New York. It's called New York Stories, and it's mostly in English, although you'll hear there are many other languages, but I don't understand them, so I just sort of left I leave you in the same position as I was, which is not translating Chinese, for instance. So I lived in New York when I was younger, as you can probably hear, and I've been going back regularly. And so this piece is like a tribute to New York, which I did when 15 years ago or something like that, like returning there. And so the beginning of the intent, the desire I had at first was to do a soundscape. That's a word I didn't mention yet. Soundscape is like usually based exclusively on sounds, and it's like an immersive experience. It's like a landscape, but with sounds. But because I'm also very much interested in content, I realized I couldn't just do like a big, long soundscape. And so what I did is really trying to recreate what my experience was when I used to go back to New York and visit all those places which I loved, and so conveying my love for that incredible city, and sitting with my friends at their kitchen table, basically, and talking about politics, which is the two things I used to do when I would go back to New York a lot. So this piece sort of conveys that. So you'll see it's very different from the previous one in the sense that the narration is much more scattered. So pay attention to that, and pay attention to how sound helps create spaces and different spaces, and the experience that it is when you don't exactly, when it's not explained what those spaces are. It might be a little more confusing, and you might like it or not. And then we'll talk about it. It's this one is in the center of the piece. It's not the beginning.
Che. Hello, mấy giờ luôn? Đó. Đi chợ. Ora chiamo sì. Che me lo danno? Tôi rồi, sao bố? Ba bố. Cái đó chị. Hả? Ba. Không được à,留下肉啊。几块肉也。差不多了吧，姐？这里还有肉。啊。
Community college. Oh, that means. Oh. How are you doing? I came out today. I'll come on. Stay on late.
I feel extremely angry and almost at the end of my wits about it. So what I was joking to you the other day that I think the thing that kind of gets me up in the morning is my hatred for America. I mean, really, this is the thing that is driving me, that gives me motivation. I want to get up and get to work, in the cause of overthrowing this country. I mean, it's like that. And I think that's a little different from how I felt when I was 20 years old. I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, in the 70s, for example, even groups like the Black Panthers would quote from the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and the radicalism in this country was oriented in great part toward this democratic promise and this promise of liberation that was as yet unrealized. And it's very hard to tap into that romantic view of the potential of the United States at this point. At this point it really feels like it's a cancer on the world. And I think it's easy to feel incredibly beleaguered here as a leftist and feel quite isolated, and in fact many left-wing groups and community organizations, I think, are trapped in a real cycle of defeatism. But there was a remark I heard Medea Benjamin say once from Global Exchange in San Francisco. She was saying you only are really in the minority if you think of yourself as an American. But if you think of yourself as a citizen of the globe, then these views that we hold are actually in the majority. It is a profound shift because it's no longer thinking of yourself as an American whose role is to make America live up to its promise or remake America so that it's characterized by social justice and an effort to end racism and end poverty and create full equality for women and gay people and all this stuff. It's sort of about abandoning that identification and that dream and throwing in your lot with people around the world against the abusiveness of U.S. power.
Yeah, I think it's I think that's true. I think it's
Attention all passengers, the 130 ferry boat Barbary is now loading through door number 1. Slip number 1. During security procedures, all passengers may be subject to screening. Thank you for your cooperation.
Radio. Yeah.
I want to say hi to everybody I know, straight from the hood, New Brighton, all day. You already know what it is, Buck. We ain't no urban terrorists out here. They supposed to.
You're too far. I can't hear you anymore.
Nah, it's okay, miss.
All right, so as you could hear, it's very different from the first piece we listened to. Do you want to share like impressions about like how it felt and how and in what sense it was different? What struck you?
I just wanted to say that it felt as if there was a strip of film being played in front of our eyes, like not as if you were going places, but as if you were standing somewhere and everything was just being paraded in front of you. And
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm getting it right. Not as if I were going places,
moving from one place to the next to record everything that you were recording, but rather as if you were standing somewhere, and all of those things, people, sounds, voices, were moving in front of you, and you were recording them.
That's interesting. And do you know what made you feel that way?
Maybe the way that it was pasted together, edited together.
That's interesting. I never thought about it that way, but I guess you're pointing at something that's very important in that piece, which is the editing. Yeah. You want to say something? Yeah, there's a question over here.
I think I agree with the with the person behind me, because in the way I hear it, you transit the one sound with the other. Like, let's say, for example, the bell. You take a soundscape, then the ring bells, and then we transfer ourselves into another soundscape. That's why she was talking about you were standing in a single spot, and everything around you was moving.
When you're talking about the bells, you're talking about the small bells that they're ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Salvation Army bells, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way, but it's interesting that you would feel that. But in any case, it's a very different experience as listeners, right? Because there are moments when you don't know where you are, and there is no explanation to say, this is where we are. So it's sort of, it requires a lot more, a different attitude as listeners, which is to accept to be sort of, it's like being, you know, in the sea, and like the sea is, the waves are moving you from one place to the other. But it also requires some being active. Mehdi's piece also, because you don't know at first who is speaking, so you have to think. It's very different than having someone telling you, this is where we are and this is what's happening, which puts you in a more passive position. To go back to the editing part, I don't know if you noticed, but it's highly edited. Mehdi's piece also, but in a different way. But in this case, there's a lot of, there's a huge amount of editing. And I don't, could you notice the differences between like close-ups and like wider plans, and accent noises, which suddenly like bring you closer to an action? Did you notice some of that, or it's, yeah. Alternate editing also, what you were saying, the woman's voice talking, and then in the back, the bells, Salvation Army bells that are sort of moving in and out. Hard cuts. I love hard cuts. They are not to be used in excess, but it's a really great way to wake up listeners if they have a tendency to fall asleep. And so when the guy is talking, he's coming back to start to say another thing, and it's a little bit, it's a way of playing with the listeners, you know, because it's like the sense that, oh, maybe he's going to talk again, and maybe that's becoming a little long. So it's like cutting him off by this huge boat, I don't know what you call it, but boom of the boat leaving. And hard cuts, usually, I mean, most of it is like very, very articulate and very subtle, fades in and fades out, and all of this is very beautiful, but sometimes a good hard cut will just like bring rhythm and accelerate, or, you know, change the pace, and that's always valuable, or at least that's what I think. And one, yeah, okay, just if there is a question there, please, can you raise your hand? Before you ask it, one more thing I want to say is the issue of realism, because in many moments it feels like really being in a Chinese store, or this incredible like Chinese place where they play like pools, and by the way, diegetic music, Chinese music, and that's I really like that when it's like small source of sound that you hear and then you get closer, and so it's very realistic in a way, but it's very, very, very much constructed. And that's one thing about documentaries. You have to remember, reality is not a given. You, through your vision, your outlook, will be reconstructing it, and given on what you're trying to show and what you're trying to say. And that's it for now. Yes, please.
Hello, and thank you. One thing I noticed was that while we were getting through the narration, through the sound narration, at some points, there were some specific instances that we reconsidered that you were the writer, the scripter. So that specific one, while you were walking and some people talked to you, but they couldn't. You said that you couldn't hear them because you were a bit far away, probably. that was also a moment that I realized that, okay, it's not just a storyline that is going on and I just hear city sounds. It is a moment that you are the viewer. So you're also the one that is making the script at that moment, and it's your perspective. You want to be there. And that's really important for me because I get the emotional alternation within the narration.
Emotional alternation?
I mean, it is, sorry, it wasn't precise. It was your point of view at that moment. So that's important for me as a listener because probably I could sleep, as you said, or I could like, okay, my mind is going on like I heard the trunk or the boat going, so I'm imagining me traveling somewhere. But no, it's your point of view, so it's important for me to get that feeling.
That's interesting because, thanks for your comment, because that's something I wanted to mention, I forgot. Yes, that little part in the end that for some reason sounded very blurry here because of the mix, I don't know, but where these young guys come up to me and they're like, oh, are we on radio? And then they go away and I say, I can't hear you. It's same thing as Mehdi was doing in his piece, which is like sort of making of, you know, like me. And it's not the first time. This is sort of the middle of the piece, and it happened before once in the piece. And it's interesting because it sort of goes to the, I guess you were saying that, it's the similar comment, which is to say, you're pointing at the fact that having the author's presence stated suddenly, saying, I'm here in a way, sort of helps you come back to your presence as a listener, to be active as a listener and not get just like floating around or you know, and I think that's pretty interesting. Truthfully, I never really thought about it that way, but it seems to be shared here, so that's cool. Thanks. Is there any other question on this, or should we move on? I'm sorry, I have to accelerate a little bit because I realize that I'm too slow, or at least we don't have enough time. I don't know. But any more questions about this one, or should we move on to the next? Yeah. Yes. Wait 1 second. Sorry, we have to wait for the mic.
At the scene where you were talking about the politics, about the U.S., why did you choose to? You were saying something about the U.S. and the politics. Why did you choose to put the train, the moment where the other person was going to say something?
The boat, you mean the hard cut with the boat leaving?
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
The boat, yeah.
Well, it's an ongoing thing. This conversation has already come up once in the piece, and then they will come back once more. They're there 3 times. So at this point, I thought it was enough at this moment. And the reason your question is why did I cut him off so abruptly?
Yeah.
It was like a little joke, as I said. It's like just to make sure that we don't feel that it's going on and on too much. You know, it's like trying to keep the right balance between these 2 very different elements, which are the city and then this conversation, and also bringing rhythm. Like as I said, hard cuts really help bring rhythm, but he will have a chance to come back and say more bad things about the U.S. in the end. So.
Thank you, thanks a lot.
Yeah. By the way, this is also you can listen to it on RT Radio. It's also easily accessible if you want to hear the whole thing. So remember what I was saying about realism, the fact that this may sound very realistic at times, but in fact it's very much reconstructed. That's true very much so about the piece that we're going to listen to now, which is by like the biggest maybe reference in French radio documentary, who is Yann Parentoen. He's a guy from Brittany. He died a while ago, but he used to call himself sound carver. He was the son of a stone carver, and he thought of his work as similar but with sounds. And he's done a lot, I mean, in terms of bringing this to the level of an really art. This piece we're going to listen to is called Lulu, which is the nickname of this woman working within the, he used to work as a technician as well at the Maison de la Radio, the public radio central place, which is a huge place in Paris. And this woman works as a cleaner there. And so it's like the portrait of Lulu. And please pay attention to the editing, the locations, and this issue of realism. It will probably sound very realistic, but it's actually very reconstructed. So voilà, a little excerpt. I translated it subtitled it for you. It was done in 1988.
Cinq heures. Je prends mes cachets, les tout petits cachets que j'ai à cause du cœur. Et puis après, je viens travailler tranquillement.
Alors Maurice, comment ils vont arriver? Bon.
5. Là-bas. Le pasteur, on descend les uns derrière les autres, parce qu'il y a des gens qui sont comme nous, qui vont travailler, qui vont faire des ménages. Hein. Ce n'est que des gens qui font le ménage le matin, qui viennent. Et on arrive là, il est 6 heures.
Bonjour.
Et les chefs qui sont là, qui vous font signer sur une feuille. Regardez bien. VIRGOULAY. Votre nom, votre heure d'arrivée, virgulé. Un nom du pays, là-bas. Voilà. Et voilà.
Tu veux des sacs?
Oui. On prend nos clés et on s'en va. Amélie Lucienne. On m'a toujours appelée Lucienne, même étant petite. Et toujours je le fais.
Bah oui, mais...
Lulu. Merci. 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 On prend son petit café. Café noir. Attention notre timbale. Ah, c'est la première des choses.
Ah, il n'y a pas de cuillère.
Bah oui. Nous non plus, on n'en a pas. Vous voyez bien. On prend son petit café, on va 10 minutes causer et on s'en va travailler. Chacun de son côté. Vous avez vu comment on fait? Tous les jours. Tous les jours, on fait ça. Le soir, c'est pareil, 14 h. On signe et on peut vite prendre notre café et on va travailler. Ben, vous avez passé à 208.
Nadia Chalan. Elle, c'est Nadia Chalan. Lui, c'est Emmanuel.
Padilla Manuel, Andalousie, en Espagne, dans le sud, Cordoue.
C'est vous qui avez fumé là déjà? C'est vous ou c'est quelqu'un d'autre?
C'est moi.
C'est vous, parce que il me semble bien d'avoir laissé le cendrier propre.
Oui, mais c'est moi, j'ai fumé.
Ah ben c'est tout à fait normal. Tenez, mettez-le vers vous.
Lulu.
Je suis née à Vichy. À Vichy, l'hôpital de Vichy. Après, j'ai grandi à Vichy. Mes parents, ils habitent Ris, dans l'Auvergne. C'est tout à côté de Châteldon. Mon père est de Châteldon. C'est la montagne, quoi. Moi, j'étais dans une ferme avec mes parents. Mon père était métayer. Il n'avait pas l'argent pour avoir la gérance du travail. Ça s'appelait métayer. C'est un bail. Quand on rentre dans cette ferme-là, on trouve tout. Les vaches, les poules, les veaux, enfin tout. Mais quand on s'en va, on est obligé de laisser tout. Ça fait mal au cœur, hein. On est resté 3 ans, mais on était bien.
Vous aviez quel âge? Je ferme la fenêtre.
J'avais, attendez voir. Eh bien, c'était pendant la guerre. J'avais 11 ans. J'avais 11 ans.
So that's yet another very different example. This is, I forgot to say, it's the beginning of the piece. And it's a long piece, it's like an hour or something like that. A few things I'm going to say, since we're running a little bit out of time, I'm going to say it myself for now, but in order to have a little time for questions at the end. So this is a really great example of the difference between situations and interviews and how he's mixing them. I don't know if you heard that, but there's this like very up close speech that of the woman, Lulu. And you also hear her in situations where she's moving around, she's working, she's doing her stuff. One trademark of Yann Parentoen, he invented that, and I think it works beautifully, is the fact that all the interviews are done in mono with like a LEM, which is an old radio microphone, Omni, that you have to put really close to the mouth, and which has this very beautiful quality. And then the situations are recorded in stereo with the ORTF, which was a stereo microphone, and which gives a sense of space. And so you have the differences in her voice between when she's talking to him and she's talking up close and she's talking about herself, and so it's more intimate. And then when she might actually be talking to him also, but more from a distance and as she's moving around. I don't know if it was not necessarily easy to understand here at first, but once you know it, you realize it's a very beautiful technique. Did you notice the author's presence as well this time? No? Yes? It's, he's also in there. It's the guy that we hear, and especially we hear him pretty well when she's talking to him and asking if he smoke, and so we hear the relationship. The nice thing about hearing the author as well is when you hear the interaction between the interviewee or the character and the author. And also one thing we start to hear is there is this other person who begins to speak, and she has an accent, and she says. She starts describing, naming other people who are other cleaners working at the Maison de la Radio. So it's like it's a portrait of Lulu, but through her, it's also a portrait of this group of cleaning people. So it's like it becomes like almost like a social group, which I think is also very beautiful. Yes, there is a question on the other side.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much. In the first audio documentary that we heard about the prosecutor, you said that because it's audio, prosecutor had to introduce himself so that we know he's a prosecutor. I was wondering that if we have an audio documentary that lasts long and we hear the prosecutor again sometime later, what will happen in this time? So in this audio documentary, you have the narrator to say which one is who is talking, so we can understand, because there is not another way we can just understand from the voice.
I'm sorry, who is the narrator in this piece?
Let's say the narrator is the lady that says the name for its cleaning person. So if we didn't have this voice, we couldn't understand who is talking. We couldn't understand Lulu is talking again after.
Yes and no. In fact, okay. I mean, it's a good point, but I wouldn't say she's the narrator, because a narrator would have to be there much earlier, enter, and introduce Lulu. In fact, Lulu is not being introduced. She introduces herself. She says her name, etc., because she's the main character.
The other characters are being introduced by the lady.
And this lady is more like one more person who's like looking at her. She's actually one of them, and she's like looking at her colleagues, and saying, this is so and so. This is so. I wouldn't call it exactly a narrator, but you're right. It works with Lulu because we are with her a long time, and she can talk about herself, and she can blah blah blah. In the other case, the other people, we have this look of the co-worker who's looking at her colleagues, which pointing at them, and then they also talk about themselves, but it's like redirecting the gaze.
So we know who is talking. You chose, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, but it's a good point. I mean, there are many strategies. You just have to make sure. the thing is, Lulu will have a lot of time with her. So it's like she's like presenting herself little by little, you know, and with small elements, details, like she starts with the pills. And that's also what's very beautiful. It's like starting with little things in order to gradually build up to something. In the first piece, it has to be a little more efficient because it's not, the prosecutor is not the main character, and he's there to talk about, the main theme is heroin, you know, so he's sort of, he has to introduce, it's a very different style of narration. But yeah, I just want to make sure for you to understand, there is no narrator in this piece either. So he's finding other strategies. Thanks. Is there another comment about this piece? It's kind of nice also for you to think about, like, that's the idea also about this, with this masterclass, is to try to reflect on all those different styles and which ones you like best and which you like less. And they're all fine, they're just different ways of telling story. And documentaries, making like fiction is like really finding the right form for the right story you want to tell. And it might change from one to the other. So the last piece that I want to have you listen to is, again, very different. Again, it's by a great voice of the radio documentary. Her name is Kay Mortley. She's still alive. She's in her 70s. She's Australian, but she's been living in France for half of her life. And this piece is called Back to Australia. It was a series for French public radio, short pieces. And we're going to listen to number 2. And they're all beautiful and all elements of the story. I want you, 2 things. This is the big comeback of narration. Finally, we'll have some narration in here. But I want you to listen to what kind of narration and how she builds it. Also, so she's Australian. This is for French radio. And I really love the way she uses the translation. It's something that was meant for a public French audience. So there's a mix of French and English, but more French. In order for you to understand, I subtitled the pieces, the parts that are in French for you not to miss anything, except when they're actually intertwined and actually exactly saying the same thing when it's English and French, in which case I didn't translate it. That's clear for you? Okay, so, sorry. Yeah, pay attention to that. The way there are 2 voices, her voice speaking in English and her daughter's voice who's speaking in French, and see how that's working. Voilà. And this is with the video again.
J'y allais parfois. C'était toujours le printemps. Le premier jour, tu te réveillais tôt. They're ominous, the crows. Are they here for the sheep? Tu dormais dans un petit lit en fer, sur la véranda vitrée de la vieille maison. Ils sont menaçants, les corbeaux. Childhood sleeps in a veranda room. L'enfant dort sur la véranda. In an iron bed, close to the wall. Dans un petit lit de fer près du mur.
But everyone slept on the veranda.
And you'd get up on the cement veranda and you'd be freezing those frosty mornings and have to race up the back to the toilet.
Petite, la vieille maison, construite par ton arrière-grand-père, pionnier, aventurier, fermier, atterri, là-bas.
Nearly all the people slept on the veranda.
Yeah, but that most. Yeah, well, we only had the small front veranda.
En bois, la vieille maison. Un toit en tôle ondulée, orné d'une frise. Dans la véranda, le matin, rentrait par les fenêtres. And splinters picked lint of warm linen. Des échardes piquaient la peluche des draps chauds. And the stars were et des étoiles pendaient sur la colline. Un mur de la chambre était une forêt où tout était en train de naître.
Well, we'll say they were happy.
Well, they were struggling.
They was healthy, mate. Kids had no boots.
But everybody, or most people were in the same position, so you didn't feel envious of anybody else. But
if you had a home and done no row about it, it was a king's castle compared to a world.
Tu écoutais le matin. Et dans ce matin-là, d'autres matins, de pionniers, d'aventuriers, de fermiers, atterris là, sur la plaine de l'Ouest, par hasard, par nécessité, par lassitude. And beyond lay the never fenced country. Et puis au-delà, le pays jamais clôturé, ses mares encerclées de bêtes et d'oiseaux criards. And something kept leaping among them. Où quelque chose ne cesse de bondir. Et là-bas, prêt à s'allumer lorsque tombe la nuit, en plein jour, une lune est accrochée. And out there, to kindle whenever dark found it, hung the daylight moon.
So that's the last piece I wanted you to listen to, and we're almost, we have to leave the place by 1, I'm sorry, yes, 1. Anyway, very soon, so I'm sorry, it's I'm going to be I'm going to have to accelerate a little bit. Just to say, I hope you heard I just love the way she works, the way she uses the narration as yet another element among other elements in this composition made of situations recorded there, the poetic, metaphoric images that come from her text, and also the use of music, this little childhood, I don't know, there is something that I find incredibly beautiful and moving, and she's really reaching an incredible level with that piece. And I also wanted you to listen to it because of the fact that this is a way of using narration, which I find so creative. So just in order to say, everything is fine, including narration, as long as you use it as a creative means, as long as it's not a laziness, out of laziness, but because it has like a very specific purpose. So we're going to be outside, and we can continue with, if you have more questions, because I'm really sorry I have to cut it off like this now. I also made this little references thing. Sorry. But which we printed, so we can give them to you afterwards. There are a few links. The two pieces, they're on Arte Radio, the Arte Radio references, and then a few other websites. Radiola, which has really interesting subtitle Belgian sound pieces. And then a couple of places for advice. The audio blog Arte Radio, which is great, but it's in French. And then in English, transom.org, which is a great resource for technical questions, but also questions of like, not only how to use the technique, but how do we, all the directing issues we might have. And it's written by professionals. It's a very interesting site. And then you have the 2021 Louis Lumière Sound Documentary projects, if you're interested in listening to them. The one we made last year, there are 6 of them. Some of them are in English. And then my name and my email address if you have more questions later on that you can ask. So I guess we'll wrap it up now and maybe, I don't know if we're going to the cafeteria next door or yeah, or outside in front, and then we'll see. Just give me a couple of minutes for technical pause, and then I'll be with you. Thank you.